So what I'd like to do is just get the panel discussion going. We will probably only be able to cover 1 or 2 questions. And so if all of the panelists can be sort of standing by their unmute button, please. One of the questions that came up earlier, which I'm going to start by asking John around, was that while there is a need to address smart local energy systems as systems, elements of them are familiar investment opportunities. So what should we and how can we, and indeed is it even appropriate to identify what should be seen as getting on with it stuff, as opposed to what needs to be thought about more in the context of a system response? So I suppose that could be interpreted as, what is it legitimate to push forward with on a sort of an asset class basis, as opposed to thinking about progressing investment opportunities as an integrated system? John, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think my main reaction to that is that I'm by no means saying that all of the investments going forwards have to have, it's to the extent that to make a credible, viable project, the extent to which that is really optimized or much better delivered with a more systems-based approach, then that's kind of almost a necessity. But I think the challenge of net zero for the next 10 years is, if we all stand around waiting for all of the perfect things to turn up, in time or at a particular time when people are ready to invest them, we're really not going to get anywhere very quickly. So I would be 100% of the view that if there are good investable projects that have a good business case in their own right, and I think most importantly they meet key criteria, that they are they're kind of well thought through. These are not projects that we can already see obsolete within sort of 10 or 15 years, or have some serious question marks around the technology that they're using, or the approach they're taking. But I think with enough kind of sensible structure and foresight around how those existing projects and assets fit into a wider plan, absolutely, it's really important to get on and do what can be done today. We shouldn't be holding back on trying to make those opportunities investable. I won't stray into talking about specific asset classes, because I think that it's a wide area, and I think it could be many different asset classes. It very much depends on what their specific application is, or the design of that project. And it might be very different in different locations for different cities and communities.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad that you talked about the importance of seeing how a project fits into a broader plan. I don't know whether it's a legitimate concern that picking off the low-hanging fruit might give us a short-term benefit and deliver some momentum, but may endanger some of the more dependent and less obvious investments that are going to be required if the net zero goal is to be reached.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing we want to do, investing in the future and the transition, is to make the same mistakes of locking in projects or infrastructure that actually preclude us from moving to a much better future. I think all sensible investors in this market, in this world, and I think the structures that we develop, for me, it'd be very important that they can flex and they can take account of new developments in technology over time. So I think investors are going to, I'm driving that internally in our own places to try and innovate the finance. It needs to start to look at assets and investments in a different way, because they may well have to be different. Even if we can see the next 10 years, we might need some flexibility to upgrade or adapt that infrastructure for its next 10 years. And investors need to be able to get comfortable with those types of business models and how we would address those challenges when they come. And my very basic example of this is, fundamentally, is the M4 a channel and a flat piece of ground that we've hollowed out between Bristol and London, because in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50 years, you could have many different uses, configurations and business models of what is going up and down that infrastructure. So that's my kind of really simple way of saying, investors also need to think a little bit more dynamically about the assets they're going to invest in.
Great, thank you, John. Oda, how does this challenge of getting stuff done, but also retaining a sense of agility and interconnection with broader system solutions sit in the thinking of the design thinking for the infrastructure bank?
Thank you. Good question. So I think several layers to that. I think one of them that would be probably of interest to a lot of the attendees here is our setting up the bank with in the mind thinking of reducing administrative burden. I think is a big one, and ensuring that everything is facilitated and making basically local authorities' life a bit easier in applying for funding, as well as navigating probably what could be very complex terminologies and navigating different financial products, for instance, and adapting. I think there is a mention of like having a bit more of a bespoke approach as well to different needs, and we are fully aware, for instance, that local authorities are at different stages sometimes in how they approach commitments to net zero and in their delivery, and being able to adapt to that. So this is how I think we approach the context on our end at the bigger picture level. We're also giving the bank quite a lot of flexibility in how they will shape this themselves. And that will be for the bank to decide probably on the technicalities and some things that you are touching on, or John has just mentioned on the business models exactly and the details of that. But broadly, our aim is to ensure that it's making it easier and how can the system adapt to each of the local authorities. I think one of the big components, and I'm quite keen to hear more about, working between local authorities, especially since I've mentioned that it would be for higher values projects that the bank would be lending, so above £5 million. So I think I'm quite interested in hearing more about that and how the bank could support that, for instance.
Great, thank you. Well, so Michael, from the perspective of the Midlands Energy Hub, any thoughts on the original question, or indeed the ask from Aude just then? Hello, Michael. Yeah.
Sorry, Philip, I missed a bit there. My connection was dipping. Could you just repeat the question?
It was. I was just interested in your thoughts, first of all, on the original question, which John and Aude have sort of elaborated on, but also towards the end of Aude's response, she asked about what you would be looking for in terms of opportunities to collaborate and so forth. So, I mean, Aude, perhaps could you restate your inquiry, Aude, just in case Michael missed it?
Sure. So I think I'm quite coming on the conversation, and I think has touched more on business models and more in the financing of the projects. And what I'm interested in, coming from a perspective that's more the strategic oversight from a position in a government, is understanding a bit more how are you perhaps more joined up and sharing knowledge. And this is what, for instance, this workshop is. But any reflection on working across local authorities, for instance, would be of interest, especially as we are setting up the bank, something that we are looking into. So that was a more specific point that I brought to the wider question.
Great. There you are, Michael.
Thank you.
One of two directions or both.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So yeah, I think from the hub's perspective, that joining up the dots and trying to get that collaboration partnership working is absolutely key. There are examples where there's one project in particular from a local perspective to start that county level where we're trying to bring partners together to actually look at investing in infrastructure to help both with the economy of scale, but also to help with the decarbonisation of their assets. And it's the sort of activity that helps us bring different strengths from the different organisations to give the project the best chance of success, but also then from an investment point of view, it also helps them to de-risk the project as well. And then looking at it at a bigger scale across the region, we're looking at the moment that there was the transport hub reference there, and we're looking at opportunity as well about where we can map out across the Midlands where the potential is to have a pipeline of a particular project type. So whether it's transport hubs or the current one we're looking at that's being discussed with our board next week is looking at mapping out the opportunities of using waste heat or low carbon heat to grow food across the Midlands. There's a bit more to it than that in specifically rural areas, is to say what's the scale of the opportunity and to map out where those different places could be, so that then we can go and say to the key stakeholders who might be interested in, here is the opportunity, here's the potential scale of the opportunity, here's the evidence to back up why it's a good idea. And then to see if we can bring the right partners around the table from the public and the private sector to actually give us a strong chance of being able to build up the right sort of business case and financial cases to drive it forward. And that can only be done in partnership working.
Great, thank you.
That answers some of the question there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. We're now over time. And sadly, I feel we're just scratching the surface of this rich and exciting and desperately important topic. Eric, are there any closing words from you?
My closing words on that session is it's a very, very good segue into the next one, where we'll be talking about one of the catapult's responses to the need to help the parties collaborate and work together, which is in the form of our Smart Local Energy Systems Toolkit. So I think it's a brilliant connection point, I think.
Fabulous. So with that, I just say to everyone, thank you so much for joining and participating so actively. The chat has been brilliant in the chat room.